It happened in front of everyone. My aunts, uncles, cousins, and even the pastor from our old church. The room was silent after my toast, a heartfelt tribute I'd written for my father's 70th birthday. I thought it might finally bring us closer, but he stared me down, raised his glass with a smirk, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, that's generous coming from someone who isn't dropped even fork." My real daughter. My cousin clutched her pearls like we were in a southern drama. But me, I froze. For a moment I thought I misheard. I blinked hoping someone would laugh and call it a joke. No one did. And just like that, every fragmented moment of my childhood, the distance, the cold looks, the things he never said snapped into sharp, undeniable was that I had come prepared. I had found something he thought was gone forever. And that night, in front of every person who once pitied me or whispered behind my back, I would expose the truth. Not just about who I was, but about who he really was. I was born on an unusually hot September morning in a quiet suburb just outside Charleston, South Carolina. My mother always said I came into the world with a scream that made the nurses jump, and I never quite stopped making noise after that. My name is Claire Dalton,
I was the only
or at
child
least
of Harold
that's the name
and
Miriam
Miriam
Dalton. At least that's what I believed for the better part of my life. Miriam was soft-spoken, the kind of woman who folded bed sheets with military precision and made grilled cheese sandwiches with exactly 3 slices of cheddar. Harold Dad was more of a mystery. To everyone else, he was the pillar of the community. A tall man with a commanding voice, always dressed sharp, and forever offering others unsolicited advice about finances, fatherhood, and not faith. Cruel, not outwardly, but distant. The kind of father who gave a perfunctory pat on the back when you got straight A's, but whose eyes always looked past you like he was searching for someone else. As a kid, I told myself he was just old-fashioned. As a teenager, I told myself he was tired. And as an adult,
Growing
I
up,
stopped asking his
questions
approval like
altogether.
air. Every science fair ribbon I won, every trophy I brought home, I would place carefully on the kitchen table, pretending I didn't care whether he noticed. But I always did. He never said much. Just a tight nod, sometimes a not bad. Never,
Mom
"I'm
tried to
proud
make
of
up for
you."
it.
Never,
I
she was
love
the
you.
kind of woman who could read your silence like a book. She never outright said anything about Dad's coldness, but I often caught the look in her eyes after he left the room, a quiet
even
sorrow
after
she
college.
never spoke aloud. While many of my classmates ran for the hills the moment they got their degrees, I moved back to Charleston, worked as a high school counselor, and helped care for Mom when she got sick. Stage 3 ovarian cancer. I was 29 when we found out, and I watched her
When she
slowly
passed
fade
something
away over the
inside,
next 2
Dad
years.
hardened
Even more. If there was a last thread tethering us together, it snapped the day we buried her. After the funeral,
From
he
then
just
on,
said
our
I'll manage
contact
and was
closed the door
occasional and
behind
formal
me.
holidays, birthdays, the rare emergency. Still, I clung to the hope that something might thaw. Maybe he just didn't know how to love, I told myself.
Me reaching out.
Maybe I could teach him. Me sending cards, me arranging dinners, me sitting across from him at a restaurant while he stared at the menu like it might bite him. I learned to laugh it off with friends. He's just not the emotional type.
But the
I
doubts
said it
began
so
creeping
often
in
it
again
became
after
a
Mom's
reflex.
passing.
They started as a whisper. Why has he never shown you a baby photo? Why do you look nothing like him? Why does he flinch when people compliment your smile and say, she must have gotten that from you? Until one
Harold.
day, while cleaning out the attic preparing to sell my childhood home, I found a locked wooden box buried behind Mom's old quilting supplies. It was plain unmarked and covered in dust. No key in sight. That box haunted me. I kept it in the trunk of my car for weeks, unsure if opening it would answer questions or destroy whatever illusion of family I had left. When I finally pried it open, it wasn't with a sense of ceremony. It was after a long
Inside was
day,
a
wine in
manila
hand, the
envelope
house
marked
marked Claire. And beneath it, a bundle of papers, birth certificates, hospital records, and a letter. My hands shook as I read through them. My birth certificate didn't list Harold as the father. In fact, it didn't list anyone. My biological father's name was redacted in all but one hospital record that had been carelessly filed.
Richard Welling.
A name I didn't know, a man I'd never met, but someone who apparently had once loved my mother. The letter clearly written by Mom was addressed to me. In it, she
explained everything.
deeply, wildly. Richard was her college sweetheart, an idealist who wanted to be a journalist. But his family disapproved of her, and after a difficult pregnancy and complicated labor, Richard's parents stepped in and took him overseas to focus on his career.
When she met Harold 2 years later,
Never saw him
she
again.
was a
single mother with a toddler. Harold, respectable and established, offered security but not warmth. He agreed to raise me as his own, but only if the truth stayed buried. She had made a
sobbed
deal
for
with a man
hours
who never truly
for
wanted
Mom,
me. For myself. For every time I'd ask Dad why he didn't come to my school recital and he said I had work. For every
Now I
time I told
understood.
myself he loved me,
I
I
was
was
a
a
symbol
symbol
of
of someone else's choice. A reminder of a
powerful
past
thing.
he never forgave Mom for. For the first time, I had clarity.
Confront him right away.
And with clarity came resolve. I would wait, watch, let him think he was still in control until the
And that
perfect
moment,
moment came on his
I offered
70th
to
birthday.
organize
The party. Everyone was surprised after all Claire and Harold weren't close. But I smiled and told them it was time to make peace. They didn't know I had already reached out to Richard, that I had spoken to the man whose name I carried in my blood.
And he had something to say.
The day I discovered the truth was the day my identity shattered and somehow also solidified. I always thought betrayal came with shouting accusations, maybe slammed doors, but mine arrived in a padded envelope, quiet,
After I found the documents
measured,
in Mom's hidden box,
irrevocable. The hospital records, the handwritten letter, and the name Richard Welling. I couldn't sleep. For 3 nights I lay in bed rehearsing conversations I'd never have. I would confront Dad,
but a small
demand
voice
answers,
in my head
demand
whispered,
the truth. He doesn't owe you answers because he never saw you as his to begin
cruel,
with.
but it was
Still, I
right.
needed more. I couldn't let a single name unravel my whole sense of self, so I started digging. First, I searched for Richard online. I didn't expect much, but there he was, gray-haired now, still with the same sharp jawline and intense gaze that stared back at me from one of the photos in the envelope. He was a journalist based in New York, semi-retired, married with 2 adult children,
before
no
reaching
mention
out.
of me, of course. What if he wanted nothing to do with me?
But
What
the
if
pain
this
of
ruined
not
his
knowing
life?
was worse
I
than
sent a
any
carefully
rejection.
worded email. No accusations, just curiosity. I told him my name mentioned my mother Miriam and said I believed we might be connected. I attached a scanned copy of the hospital record with his name on it.
I waited 4
Then
days.
his reply came, Claire. I've been waiting for this my entire life. Please call me. I stared at that line for a full
Richard,
5 minutes.
that first
Then our
conversation
conversation was awkward, tentative. He was clearly emotional but cautious. I never stopped thinking about your mother, he said. When my parents took me overseas, I thought I could go back, make it right. But by the time I returned, she had married someone else. She'd changed her
believed him.
number.
Maybe I
I
was
was
foolish,
foolish,
but
but something in his voice, the cracking, the
talked more
hesitation
over the
told me
next
this
few
wasn't
weeks.
just a story. I asked for a paternity test. He agreed immediately. The results came back 99.98% positive. I was his
stared at
daughter.
the words
I was
paternity
his, confirmed
but
like they
along
were
with
written in
confirmation
fire.
came
something worse. The realization that Harold, the man who raised me, who married my mother, who stood in our family photos, had known this all along. And yet he treated me like a guest in his home,
never once
like an
said,
obligation. You're not
like a
mine.
stain.
Not in words. But now I understood the silence, the missed birthdays, the looks of disdain when
He must
people
have
said,
seethed
she's the
inside.
spitting image of you.
And
And
Harold.
Mom, dear quiet Mom, had tried to hold the secret
That was the
together like
betrayal.
patching a dam with her
Not
bare
just
that I
hands.
wasn't his biological child, but that for over 30 years, he
tried
let
to
me
keep my
believe I wasn't
composure.
worthy of being For weeks, I went about my days pretending nothing had changed. I smiled at students in the high school hallway, answered emails, hosted parent-teacher meetings. But inside, something cracked. I was walking around with the weight of a truth no one else knew.
Except Richard.
He began writing to me. Long letters typed out like journal entries. Memories of my mother. Regrets. A description of the last time he saw her. She was standing in the rain, not saying goodbye, just watching him go. But if she had told me about you, I would have come back.
To believe him
I
fully.
would have fought. But another part, the part Dad carved hollow, held back. I wasn't ready to call him Dad. Not yet. Maybe never. But I wanted to know him.
I saw Harold
And I
2 weeks
wanted the
before
other
his
man
birthday
to know that I
party.
knew. I invited him to lunch under the guise of celebration planning. He agreed as usual, out of duty rather than enthusiasm. We met at a bland restaurant he liked,
You don't
sterile
need to
with
go
crisp
all out for my
tablecloths
birthday,
and
he
he
said,
said, cutting into his steak.
Still, I
70's
said
not some
calmly,
grand
I
milestone.
thought we could
do something different this year. Maybe
He
invite
raised an
everyone.
eyebrow.
Family,
Everyone?
old friends, even some from church. I smiled.
He gave me
Might
a
be the
curious
last
look,
time
but
you
see
said
them all in
nothing.
one room.
Maybe deep down he suspected I was up to something. Or maybe he thought I was finally accepting my place, just the daughter trying to win him over
That
again.
gave me all the power I
worked
needed.
quickly, booked the venue, called cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, coordinated with his sister Marla, who always adored me. I even invited people he once mentored, students, colleagues, community members. Harold loved a room full of people who admired him, and he'd get just
But
that.
not the
The night
admiration.
before the party, I sat at my kitchen table and drafted my speech. It started like any other tribute: a man of conviction, a leader, a father. I practiced it until the words were memorized, until I could say them without my voice
Because the
trembling.
twist wouldn't be in the delivery.
It would be in the ending. I had one more thing to do. I booked a flight for Richard. He was hesitant, even nervous. "Are you sure this won't
They're
make
already
things
worse,"
worse?"
I told
he
him.
asked. "This
He
isn't for
arrived 2
revenge.
hours before
This is
the
for
event.
me." I met him outside the venue and for the first time saw my face reflected in someone else's. His eyes were mine. His crooked half-smile, even the way he adjusted his jacket like
I
me,
feel like I've
always
waited a
fidgeting.
lifetime for this,
He said
"You have," I
softly.
replied.
The
"So have
party was
I."
held at a hall just outside Charleston, surrounded by oaks draped in moss. Southern charm, the kind Harold loved. Guests arrived in waves. They brought gifts, hugged, laughed, toasted. He ate it up. For once, he seemed genuinely
Until I
joyful.
stepped
Up to the microphone
and ended my speech
"Tonight
with,
we celebrate a man who raised me. But more importantly, we uncover the truth about who I am and who he's always known I
The
wasn't."
silence that followed was
Then I
deafening.
stepped
And
aside,
Richard
walked forward. Harold's expression didn't change right away. For a few seconds, his face was stuck in that frozen smile, the kind meant for family gatherings and forced pleasantries. But as Richard stepped forward, taller than he looked in photos, distinguished, confident, that
And
smile
Harold's
cracked.
entire world
The
began
crowd
to
didn't know
unravel.
what to do. Some whispered. Others turned to each other, confused. A few looked at Harold for explanation, but he was
Richard took the
silent,
microphone with
stunned,
surprising grace.
cornered. "I'm sorry to interrupt this celebration," he began, his voice calm but firm.
He introduced
"But I
himself.
think it's time the truth had its
briefly,
own toast." With just enough detail to make it clear he wasn't some random guest. He was my biological father, a man who had spent years not knowing I existed. A man Harold had known about for over 3 decades and deliberately erased
The
from our lives.
silence in the room became
Then, like a
thick,
detonated
dense.
minefield, the
Harold
whispers
stood
slow and
exploded.
stiff, his face drained of color.
My heart pounded
"Claire,
in my ears.
what do you
but I
think you're
didn't
doing?"
flinch.
"I'm doing what you should have done years ago, telling the truth. You raised me with resentment, not love. You made me feel like I was never enough. And now everyone
His jaw
knows why.
tightened. It
This is
never
not the
was, I
place." I
shot
shot back. "That's the point. There was never a place for me in your
He
heart."
looked like he might argue.
So I made one
Maybe
right
storm
here, right
out.
now. But he didn't. He just sat back down slowly and stared at the table, defeated.
But this
Or
wasn't
maybe
the end of the
calculating.
plan.
No, this
The
was
real
just the
revenge
unveiling.
had been in motion
After I
for
found out the
weeks.
truth, and after Richard and I connected, I did more than plan a party. I went through legal records. I looked into Harold's finances, his history, and even the way he'd manipulated my mother's estate after she passed. And what I found wasn't just infuriating, it was
Turns out
actionable.
Harold had never legally
That little
adopted me.
detail seemed insignificant until I realized how he used it to his advantage. When Mom died, she left everything to her husband and daughter. Harold interpreted that loosely. Because I wasn't legally his child, he funneled nearly all of her estate, our family home, her pension, even her life insurance payout into his name. I received a ceremonial token, her jewelry box, and a car that
I was
barely
grieving.
ran. I didn't
But now
question
with
it.
Richard's
help and a lawyer he connected me with, we dug
My
deeper.
mother had actually
And the
updated her
findings
will
were
6
damning.
months.
months before her death. The revised copy left everything to me with specific clauses that limited Harold to a modest allowance and life tenancy in the house. But that version mysteriously vanished after
Until
her
I found it in
funeral.
that locked
That
wooden
discovery
box.
turned everything. It meant Harold had ignored her last wishes, destroyed a
So
legal
yes, my public
document, and
confrontation
potentially
at the
committed
birthday
fraud.
party
Was dramatic. But it was also a trap. A carefully constructed moment to get Harold to respond emotionally in front of witnesses. To say just enough to confirm he knew the truth all along.
And he did.
After the party, we didn't speak for several days. Not a call, not a text.
Then I received a
no
letter.
envelope. Just slid under my door like a
embarrassed
passive-aggressive
me.
You've
Newspaper.
humiliated this family. I never wanted you in the first place, and now the whole town knows why. I hope you're
No
proud of
signature,
yourself.
no
warmth, just venom.
I kept the letter.
2 days later, my lawyer filed a petition with the probate court to reopen my mother's estate, citing the discovery of the revised will and potential suppression of a
That's
legal
when Harold
document.
called. I
At
stared
2
at the
a.m.,
phone,
ringing in the dark, his name glowing across the screen like a ghost. I let it ring.
He tried again.
The third time I picked
You really
up.
want to go to war with me? He asked, his
This
voice
isn't war, I
hoarse.
said.
I
It's
raised
justice.
you. I fed you. I
And
put
you
a
made
roof
sure
over
I
your
knew
head.
every day that I wasn't yours, I said calmly. Now the
was
courts will
quiet.
know it too.
Then bitterly, you think you'll win.
I already have.
I hung up.
The weeks that followed were intense. Legal paperwork, hearings, depositions. I had to sit in front of a judge and tell my story while Harold sat across from me cold as ever.
The
But
revised
this
will
time
was
the power
verified
was
as
shifting.
authentic.
My mother's handwriting
Harold had
notarized
no
witness.
explanation for why it
Eventually,
hadn't
a court
surfaced.
ruling reinstated the amended will and reversed the previous transfer of assets. The house was returned to me. The remaining funds in the estate were recalculated, and Harold was ordered to repay the portion he'd
furious,
taken improperly.
humiliated,
And still he never apologized.
but I didn't need him
I moved
to.
back into the house I grew up in. Not because I wanted to return to the past, but because it felt like reclaiming something that was stolen. I had it repainted, gutted the dark kitchen, took down all the old portraits where his stern
replaced
face
them with
loomed over
pictures
the
of my
mantel.
mother.
And of Richard.
The
And of
daughter
me.
who had been
The
ignored.
daughter who now owned
People in
everything.
town whispered for a while,
Asked if I
and
regretted
every
making
time
a
I
scene.
said the
Same
was
thing.
worth it.
I didn't destroy my family. I just told the truth they tried to bury.
That truth had set me free.
And I wasn't finished. There's a moment somewhere between pain and peace when a woman stops asking why someone didn't love her and
That
starts
moment
wondering
hit
why
me
she
on a
spent
Tuesday
so long
morning
trying to
with
earn
the
it. Sun pouring through my mother's old kitchen window, freshly cleaned, now trimmed with lemon-colored curtains I had sewn myself. I was making coffee, the kind I liked. No one else to please, no one else's preferences to memorize. Just me, my dog Scout, curled at my feet, and silence that finally felt like I was waiting for someone to tell me I mattered. School 3 months after the hearing. Not because I hated it, but because I had a sudden realization I had spent my entire life caretaking. Holding students' hands through heartbreak, calming panicked teens, organizing college plans, staying late to listen to parents vent. It was meaningful work, but it was also another extension of how I'd been trained to live invisible, useful,
I didn't
always
know what was
responsible.
next,
But I knew I
started
was
small.
done shrinking. I took a weekend pottery class. I bought bright red lipstick for the first time since I was 20. I went on solo dates to the farmer's market, to bookstores, to little hole-in-the-wall diners where I ate pie and read poetry aloud to myself, like I was the only person in the world.
And then I started writing.
It wasn't planned. It started as journaling late at night, messy and raw. But soon pages turned into stories. Real ones about my life, my mother, the lies that cracked my childhood wide open. I didn't write to expose Harold. I wrote to
submitted
remind
one of
women
those
like
essays
me
to a
that they
local
weren't
magazine.
alone. I almost didn't hit send. I closed my laptop twice. But then I thought of all the times I had swallowed my voice and
3
clicked
weeks later,
submit
they
like it was a
published it,
revolution.
The Daughter Who
The
Didn't
response
Belong,
was
until she chose
overwhelming.
herself.
Women emailed me from towns I'd never heard of. They told me about the fathers who dismissed them, the families who erased them, the lies they'd lived inside. They thanked me, cried with me. One woman wrote, "I didn't even know I was allowed to feel angry until I read your
That's when
story."
I realized this
I
was bigger
started a
than me.
blog, Unwritten Daughters, a place for women to share the things they were never allowed to say out loud. Betrayals, recoveries, awakenings. I added a submissions page. I held virtual writing circles. Within months, we were a community, not of victims but of witnesses. Women who had survived being invisible and were now choosing
gave
to
me
be
a
sense
sense
of
of
purpose I
One
had never felt
afternoon,
before.
I
I received a message from a woman named Anna. She said she had seen my essay and something about it wouldn't leave her alone. She had grown up in a strict household too. She knew the ache of being not enough. She asked if we could meet for coffee.
We did.
Then we met again and again.
somewhere
between those coffee dates and long
I had never
evening walks,
considered that
love
something
could look
bloomed.
like this: gentle, curious, respectful. There was no grand declaration, just small acts, a hand at the small of my back. A text that said, "I saw this poem and thought of you." A glance that
I
made
told
me
her
feel like I
everything
was home
about
in
my
someone's
mother,
eyes.
about
Harold, about the lie, the
She
will,
never
the
looked at
courtroom.
me with pity.
"You're
only
incredible,"
awe.
she said once, her fingers brushing mine. Not for surviving, but for turning survival into power.
And I believed
I no
her.
longer felt broken. I
That
felt
summer, I
forged. hosted the first Unwritten Daughters retreat. 10 women showed up to the house, now painted soft sage with white shutters and a garden Mom would have adored. We laughed, cried, wrote, danced barefoot in the backyard. Some brought old photos, others burned letters they had never sent. One woman read a goodbye note to the version of herself who always said sorry before
It was
speaking.
the most alive I'd ever
Harold,
felt.
meanwhile, stayed
Word around
silent.
town
Was that he rarely left the house anymore. He'd resigned from the community board. skipped church, stopped attending bridge nights at the rec center. His pride had been hit harder
People
than
asked
I
if I
expected.
regretted how publicly
My
I
answer stayed the
handled
same.
things.
I regret
One day
waiting
I got a
30
letter,
years.
not from Harold but from Marla, his sister.
It was brief.
Claire.
I know things have been complicated, but I want you to know I always loved you like my own. Your mother was my best friend and she adored you beyond words. I see her in you every time you speak. You deserve everything you've built.
I cried for
I'm
an
proud
hour
of you.
after reading that.
Love, Aunt Marla. Not out of sadness, but because somewhere in me, the small girl who once asked, "Why doesn't he love me?" was finally
I had
letting
always
go
been
of the
whole.
question. The cracks were just places where the light got in. Brought sunflowers and sat under the old oak tree beside her headstone. I told her about the retreat, about Richard, about Anna. I even told her I forgave her for staying silent, for making that deal with Harold, for trying to protect me the only way she knew how.
You loved me the
I
best you
leaned
could,
my head
and I'm
back
finally
closed
doing the
my
same.
eyes. The wind moved through the trees like
In
a
the
lullaby.
distance, I heard
Somewhere
church
deep in
bells.
my chest, I felt peace.
Real peace.
Not because I won. Not because I had
because I had
reclaimed
finally
what was
stopped
mine. Begging for love from someone who was never
Started
capable
offering
of
that
giving
love
it.
to
The woman who needed it most, me. The letter came on a rainy Thursday
wasn't the
afternoon.
weather
That made me uneasy, but the envelope itself. Heavy cream paper, no return address, sealed with red wax like something out of a different era. It had a weight to it, literal and emotional, that made my fingers tremble
Inside
as
was
I
a
opened
single
it. Sheet of paper and a photograph.
The paper read,
Claire. There's more you need to know. He made us all swear to keep it hidden. But secrets like this don't stay buried forever.
no signature.
Just the
photo was
initial. Grainy old with frayed edges. My mother stood in the center smiling in a way I hadn't seen since childhood. She looked radiant free. On her left, unmistakably, was Richard. Younger, wild-haired, and
But on her
grinning.
right was another
My
man.
blood turned to ice.
It was Harold.
Not the Harold I grew up with, the man in stiff suits and colder silences, but a much younger version. Hair dark, arm casually around my mother's waist. The way his hand rested there, the way he looked at her, it wasn't resentment. It was something else entirely.
Affection.
The date scribbled on the back of the photo, March 1987.
3 months before I was
stared
born.
at the photo for what felt like hours. My brain couldn't make sense of it. Why would Mom be standing between both men, the man she loved and the man who'd later pretend I wasn't his? Unless he wasn't pretending. Unless he wasn't so sure either. 1,000 puzzle pieces scattered in my mind. Memories, questions, timelines. My mother had always said she and Harold married when I was 2, but what if that wasn't the whole story? What if their relationship had started earlier when she was pregnant? What if she hadn't been sure who the father was? My breath caught. All this time I thought Harold had rejected me because I wasn't his.
I called Richard.
But what if told him
He
about the
didn't know
letter and the
either.
photo?
I knew she
He was
with
quiet
someone
for a
else
long
around
that time, he said finally. She never said who.
You never asked.
I was afraid of the answer.
We
We decided to take another test, one with higher accuracy, this time with medical oversight. Part of me didn't want to know. I had just rebuilt myself, my identity, my peace. Did I really want to tear open
I
that
couldn't
wound
live with
again?
a lie.
The
Not
results
anymore.
came back in 10 days.
Negative.
Richard was not my
I read
father.
the
report 3 times. Then again. The 99.98% match from before had been an error, a faulty at-home test with compromised samples.
The man I
The new
thought
report
had never
was
wanted
definitive.
me.
Might have been my real father
felt
after
like the
all.
floor fell
I
out
sat
from
at the
beneath
edge of
me.
my bed, photo in hand, the storm outside echoing the chaos in my chest. My whole life I had searched for belonging, tried to make sense of rejection. Now the rejection itself was rooted in a misunderstanding, a silence, a
wasn't
doubt
angry at
neither of
Richard.
them had dared to
He had
confront.
stepped
Up with the best intentions, but I couldn't stop thinking about Harold, the man who had looked at me like I was a stranger in his house, the man who could have been my father, but had chosen
That
not
weekend
to be.
I drove
He
to his
didn't answer
house.
the door at first.
Finally,
I
he knocked
opened it,
again.
older than I remembered, stooped slightly, as if time itself had punished him in inches.
"What do you want?" he
Answers, I
asked.
said,
He
and maybe
didn't
invite
clarity.
me in. But he didn't close the door either.
I held up the
His
photo.
eyes went sharp, then soft.
"Where did you
It
get
doesn't
that?"
matter. What matters is that we both know what it means.
He looked down.
I never knew for sure, he admitted. Your mother, she wouldn't say. I asked once. She told me it didn't matter, that you were ours. But I saw the look in her eyes, the hesitation.
So instead of loving me, you punished
He didn't
me.
argue.
I
He
was
couldn't. Scared, he said finally. Scared I'd raise a child who wasn't
You were
mine.
first, I
Scared
said,
I'd
voice
come in
trembling.
second again. You married her. You lived with us. You had every chance. And you chose
didn't know how else to
I nodded
survive it.
slowly. Well, I did.
For the
I
first
survived
time in
without
my
you.
life, he looked
Was
at me
I
like he saw me.
Really your daughter? I
His
asked,
face
voice
crumpled,
barely above a whisper.
and
For a terrifying moment, I
know,
saw
he
something
said.
that looked like grief. But you could have been. And I'll never forgive myself for not treating you like you were.
I swallowed hard.
That makes 2 of us. I left him standing there in the doorway under a flickering porch light. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel victorious.
But I felt done.
Back home, I opened my laptop. I wrote a new essay titled The Man Who Might Have Been My Father and Chose Not to Be. It wasn't angry, it wasn't revenge.
It was truth.
And when it published, it reached more women than
In their
anything I'd
messages,
written
I
before.
found
A deeper understanding that what makes us whole is not knowing where we come from, but who we choose to become. That family is not in blood or names or DNA, it's in
chose to love my
choice.
mother even
I
with
chose
her
to
flaws.
forgive Richard,
I
even if
chose
he
to
wasn't
walk away
mine.
from Harold knowing he never truly
And I
tried.
chose myself
Completely,
irrevocably,
not as someone's
but
daughter.
as my own woman.